tap yours?
Yeah, I think it's on.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sophia Nahlawi, Adult Program Associate here at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Thank you all for joining us for this evening's Pratt Test Kitchen featuring Michael Twitty in conversation with Sara Shalva. Please give a round of applause. And so now for tonight's speakers. Michael Twitty is a culinary historian and food writer from the Washington, D.C. area. He blogs at afroculinaria.com. He's appeared on Bizarre Foods America with Andrew Zimmern, Many Rivers to Cross with Henry Louis Gates, and most recently, Taste the Nation with Top Chefs Padma Lakshmi. HarperCollins released Twitty's The Cooking Gene in 2017, tracing his ancestry through food from Africa to America and from slavery to freedom. A finalist for the Kirkus Prize and the Art of Eating Prize, and a third-place winner of Barnes & Noble's Discover New Writers Awards in Nonfiction. The Cooking Gene won the 2018 James Beard Award for Best Writing, as well as Book of the Year, making him the first Black author so awarded. His piece on visiting Ghana and Bon Appetit was included in Best Food Writing in 2019 and was nominated for a 2019 James Beard Award. His next book, Rice, became available through UNC Press in 2021. Kosher Soul, his follow-up to The Cooking Gene, will be out in August 2022 through HarperCollins. Michael has a hit spice line based on The Cooking Gene and a recent special guest appearance on Michelle Obama's Waffles and Mochi show on Netflix. Sara Shalva is the Chief Arts Officer at the Jewish Community Centers of Greater Baltimore, where she oversees the strategic vision for the Center of Arts and Culture. Sara graduated cum laude from Mary Washington College with a BA in Political Science and as a Taub Fellow from NYU with dual masters in Nonprofit Management and Judaic Studies. Previously, Sara served as the Assistant Director at the Pearlstone Center and the Chief Program Officer, Jewish Life and Learning at the Ed Eldovich DCJCC. Sara lived in Israel for 4 years, where she studied at Hebrew University and the Pardes Institute, volunteered on Project Otzma, and worked at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. Sara lives in Pikesville with her 2 children, Lev and Avital, and her husband, Rabbi and writer Benjamin Shalva. And so, finally, without further ado, please give a round of applause for Michael Twitty and Sara Shalva.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me if I just talk like this? Okay, great. I'm so happy to be sharing the stage with you. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. This is going to be a fun night. We're going to have a fun time together. In his first book, The Cooking Gene, Michael Twitty interweaves the history of American slavery with his own personal ancestral slave story. A culinary historical memoir that is both lyrical and scientific, Michael's deep and detailed research includes not only the history of the ingredients of meals made by slaves, but also the kinds of pots and pans, the fire and ash, the rations and recipes, and the tragedy and trauma of the chattel slave trade in American history. Tracing his genealogy through the American South and slavery, and even further back, tells the story of the history of cooking in the South and the history of his own family's origins. This profound and meaningful book crosses genres. It is a cookbook, it is a memoir, it is culinary history, it is a genealogical study, and it is the detailed personal account of the trauma and tragedy of slavery in America and its continued legacy across these United States. And Michael Twitty identifies himself as a Jew of color and a queer man. Holding many different identities has always been part of his journey. I'd like to start at the beginning. One of my favorite interviewers is Krista Tippett, who is on Being, which is from National Public Radio. And she always opens her interviews with a question. What was the spiritual or religious upbringing of your childhood? But I want to talk about food. So can you please talk about the culture, the food culture of your childhood? What did you eat? What did you learn about what you were eating? And how did your family talk about food?
Okay. So I guess I want to do a corrector to the bio. Like the other reason why I mentioned Barnes and Noble is because Nomadland won first place. I could have been Nomadland. And Frances McDormand could have played me in a movie, I guess. As problematic as that sounds. So I didn't realize until much later where we were placed in terms of food and the American experience. I'm going to be very blunt. When I was young, as my grandmother would say, a Lee boy, though the food world for American children was Pizza Hut, McDonald's, and KFC, especially if you were Black. KFC was called, I think I said this in the book, women's liberation. McDonald's was where most kids then the part of DC area was in, which was, very nice, whatever. But you have to understand for other communities, right now, that's not a thing, right? That if you have, uplift, social uplift, you don't go to that kind of spot. But for us, the grandchildren of poor sharecroppers and migrants, any restaurant experience of any level was like a step up. And if you could buy food for your family outside and not cook it, that was a step up. That was fine. That was, if you could, any level of, it was like the worst form of catering, right? So I didn't understand that, like, that wasn't like, no, excuse me, we all did not understand the consequences of that. But this is where we are. I did not.
I had my birthday at McDonald's many years.
Yes,
I'm just going to say that.
I'm
going to come out as a child of the 80s. I loved birthday parties at McDonald's.
Right. And that was it. And that was the thing. And that we did love it. And it wasn't like, it's not like a total finger wag. That's not where I'm going with this. I'm not saying you should like switch the whole paycheck. That's not my point, right? But I just feel like that was at the front. In the middle was this world of a Black food performance. I didn't have words for yet. Okay. So I'm just gonna cut to it. That was the world of the foodways of the Great Migration. To be exact, I've always considered Washington, D.C., Baltimore, St. Louis, and Kansas City to not really be, they're not the North. They're not the Deep South. They were still very segregated, racially hierarchical, racially riot-prone cities where there was a pecking order based on race, color, gender, power, etc.
Are you talking about when you're growing up?
Even then.
Okay.
I mean, having, my father, a blessed memory, my father passed last Monday. My father was the water chief in DC. He worked for Marion Barry. To other people, he's just the drug mayor joke. To us, like what was the mayor of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson, and others, they gave Black people jobs. They enforced affirmative action contracts. They were no longer going to accept the idea that we were just to be the support of the upper class. That's what built the Black middle class in DC. And so to us at that time, so Marion Barry's our mayor. Jesse Jackson's running for president. Michael Jackson's the biggest thing in the world. And I grew up in a majority Black world where to having the nice house and having expectations like as a kindergartner, we had to stand up, memorize, and sing, lift your voice and sing. That was serious. And I'll never forget stumbling through memorizing Langston Hughes's The Negro Mother in first grade. I will be with you till no white brother dare strike down the children of the Negro mother. I could still say it like that, right? Forget the rest of the poem. That's hard. But in that food world that was a part of that, people were from Southern Maryland. See, DC got Southern Maryland Baltimore got Eastern Shore and the surrounding counties. DC got like a string of Central Virginia, and like Baltimore got like, and also the tobacco belt, and Baltimore got like the coastal side and a little bit south side of Virginia. And then both places got bits of North and South Carolina. So that was the emphasis. Plus, my maternal grandparents were from Birmingham, Alabama, but they had earlier migrated to where you usually went to when you're from Alabama, Ohio. So there was so that was the other part of the world. Up from Alabama, Ohio, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Akron, Toledo, then Chicago, Milwaukee, etc. Why am I even bringing this up? Because I wouldn't be in the same position had I not been born where I was, to write, to think, etc. My cousins in the Rust Belt have had a much harder time than me. They didn't have free museums to go to and free zoos and stuff. To do that, they had to go, gentrification, redlining, all those things have been compiling, let alone clean water, have been compiling against them. So for us, now I can look back at it and see it with clear eyes. We weren't really a Sunday dinner family, but we were a regular special occasion family. So there were the barbecues and cookouts. I do remember what it was like to have the alleys, not the blocks, but the alleys with the tables for dominoes and the barbecue and all of that. I remember the brick grill. Is it really brick? Those those concrete blocks.
Yes.
And that was our hood version of a Weber grill, right? And you would buy the rack, and it was built in the afternoon. I could see my uncles do it, and it was amazing to me. And then the kitchen was like that 70s olive pea green kind of thing, that kind of sea turtle kind of something nonsense, all of those, and then that mustard yellow. And I saw a picture, and my memory was pretty good because there was the rack with my grandfather put the nails, my grandma had the pots. And I would sit in the corner of the kitchen. My father was a Vietnam vet. So my father had, military hopes for me. And so I'm in the corner with this helmet on, right? And there's all this military gear, this fake machine gun, because my grandmother would make the most amazing, like, potato bread, biscuits, all that stuff. And so everybody got it. Every cousin, every neighbor, every friend of the family, where they used to live across town, Oakwood Terrace, everybody, every diplomat, my grandfather did some government stuff, everybody. So they would literally come to the house in droves. And I got so mad, and I started to cry and cry and cry. And I said, Grammy, stop giving away my bread. And so I'm literally in the corner crying, going, bread, with this fake gun, right? And then my grandmother would like shut me up with like this big Michael roll, slathered with like, peach, grape, apple butter, whatever. And I would sit there smiling like a crocodile as, the dog and the dog would eat my crumbs. The dog was named Brandy, big Saint Bernard. And that was what it was like.
Talk a little bit about how you got interested in genealogy.
My uncle, who I'm my mother's youngest brother, who I'll be honest with you, I'm estranged from, for many reasons, was captivated by roots. And that also, I like to tell people I came into the world with Haley's Comet. Alex Haley's Comet. In 77. So he was 16 when he was 13 when I was born. And then he spent 13 to 16 pulling together little bits of money and traveling to Alabama and other places where our family was from. So I just grew up with it. By the time I was in the 4th grade, we had a project like, where's your family from? Which is the dreaded project for Black kids. Because it's like, okay, and when I was in Montgomery County, also Jewish kids. It was because I come from the time and place when people had grandparents who were in the Shoah. I also come from the time and place where people had grandparents who lived through Jim Crow, and also had, all these other traumatic things. And then, not to be outdone, if you were from Southeast Asia, you knew why you were there. You were there because of post-Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. Iran, a lot of kids who I grew up with came in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. So all around there's these stories of just like, okay, troublesome things. So my uncle is kind of like showing me all this stuff for this fourth grade project and these pictures. And I heard little rumblings, but it got to me. And of course, when I really got to read and watch Roots, that got to me. And I will say that when things started to fall in place for the book, I made a pilgrimage because I was in Memphis. I made a pilgrimage to Alex Haley's home, boyhood home with his grandmother. And
Different than the discomfort tour.
different than Discomfort Tour.
Okay.
And it was just straight up, okay. And it was almost like a Rebbe visit.
Oh.
Like, so I don't know. Okay. So in very traditional Judaism, certain rabbinical figures are given almost like the saint treatment without being actually saints. And so you leave little bits of writing, prayer, and you go to the grave and you pray to God. You don't pray to the rabbi, and you ask for the gates of heaven to open. And so I've done that on a number of occasions in Israel and America. And I figure, why not with Alex Haley? And pour libation in the African tradition. And I went to Henning, Tennessee, to that little porch, and he's buried right in the front lawn. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how you did it, but I've got to do this because our people need this. It's not a one-time deal, man. We got to keep doing this. And maybe it worked. But for me, in my mental and spiritual state, I remember going there, but I also remember the feeling of cleanliness, leaving it. Like I remember every cotton field, and the cotton was out then, and the sorghum and the peanuts and the corn and everything. I remember all of that. And also remember having a gas station biscuit, which I was really scared of because y'all who have really been on the road to your home place know about that gas station food. And it's not like 7-Eleven. No, it's for real a whole setup with the chicken frying, mixing with the smell of the gas outside. But that biscuit was tight though. I ain't gonna lie.
It sounds like a spiritual and transformational experience.
Yes.
All right, the biscuit and the visit.
Yes.
Okay. How do you see your personal family story? In what ways is your family unique? And in what ways is your family story a symbolic representation of African American history?
Oh, beautiful. So I really wanted to do my friend Teresa Nelson, who's a chef and culinary writer of her own right. She said to me very early on when I was cooking this up, and I knew I was going to have a book. She said, we need a blueprint. She said, I know I'm from Latta, South Carolina. I don't know much more than that. How did I get there? How do we get up here to Jersey and New York? What was the whole process? And what came before that and before that and before that? So I knew I had to write something. I always wanted to write about my greatest generation, the generation that survived Jim Crow. I always wanted to write about our food, and I always wanted to write about our Africanisms, our connections to the continent, and also our family story. So I had to weave all of that together, one big holla. And so the whole idea was, all right, so you got to show these dim, you have to use the imagination to translate historical fact, which was we were West and Central Africans primarily. Some of us may have been from Southeast Africa, Madagascar, like some of my ancestors were. And that these represent really ancient global stories. Madagascar, what does that mean? It means that some of my ancestors on both my mother and father's side came all the way from Indonesia to Africa, made a new world with the Africans that were there. And that somehow these people on the other side of Africa got caught up in the American slave trade. And that was 6 months on a slave ship. So it was so bad that some people arrived without eyes. And so I would get all these details in, and the more and more I learned, Sarah, the more and more I thought, I'm not supposed to be here. This is a miracle that any of us are here, right? And so talking about what is this food thing, and I started to imagine these women from different African ethnic groups, sitting with each other on American plantations and in cities going, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to inculcate to our children where they come from so they never forget who they are? And you can imagine, so a Yoruba woman says, okay, Ila, okay. Or your Igbo woman says, Okuru. A Khan woman says, Onkuruma. Wolof woman says, Kanja. Mandinka woman says, Kanjo. They're all talking, and Kimbundu woman says, Ovi Gombo. They're all talking about the same thing, okra. What do we do with the okra? We made it into a soup. Okay, great. So the soup became okra soup. It became gumbo. It became okra soup with crab here in Baltimore. It had various elements, but they passed on in history. So my job was to fill in the gaps. So I'll quickly do this. For most Black families, the 1870 census is the first census that you will find your ancestors on, unless they were free people of color and located in other parts of the country. Now, if your ancestors were free people of color, that would have been very rare, but you could find them on tax lists, census, local censuses, et cetera, et cetera. Most of my ancestors, to my knowledge, were enslaved. A very few were free, and free by default, meaning they were probably could pass for white. So 1870 will hopefully get you somebody who was at least 1840, 1820, 1830, 1820. That's the hope, that you should find in my case, great-great-great-grandparent, that you would also find their parents and grandparents. What's the problem? The likelihood that they would have been sold away from each other is high. So now you're talking about the constant disruption of Black families.
That part in your book is so devastating.
Let's talk about that really quickly, because referring. I have to,
Okay.
Because referring to when I talk about the Devil's Half Acre in Richmond, and I couldn't. That was one of the hardest chapters to write, because I had to take the reader through what it was like for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of my ancestors to be sold and separated.
The auction. So I went to college in Fredericksburg.
Right, where I live now.
And there are still now like auction blocks, which I have to admit, I'm not sure when I was in college that I thought like a human being stood here and was purchased, and that's like a
it's real.
Yeah, and a horrible history that we have not redeemed, that we have not like.
Every time you pass by that station in Richmond, the Main Street station, where they were going to turn the whole area into a sports complex, every inch of that land was where a human being was sold every 3 minutes. Including my own people, every 3 minutes. And so you just think about what that means. I say a little prayer, say a little something, and I'll even be that nosy person who'll be like, you know where y'all are, right? Because I don't want people to forget that. And what really, so the food component goes like this: St. Augustine, Richmond, Lexington, many southern cities, where the farmers market is now, that was the auction spot. That's not a market because it's cute, because it's convenient, because it's urban. It's an auction spot because it always was one, a marketing spot. In Lexington, Kentucky, they call it the Cheapside Market. You know why it was called Cheapside? Because you could buy a half-blind, lame, or what they refer to as dumb slave for cheap. And so that's the part that gets you, and the fact that, they would be washed sometimes in pot liquor or grease to make them look healthy, or that when you actually were auctioned as a child, you might not even be aware of what's going on. They would give you an apple to force you to show your teeth. You think you're eating a snack, and they're making you so they can age you, and also so you can give maybe a smile, so that you look tractable. So food was woven into every single aspect, from what they were going to carry over and preserve from Africa, the things that they came up with new in America in exile that were parallel to their tradition, the things that they adopted the things that they contributed, but also the survival from day to day and these traumatic incidents. And what I wanted to get across to our readers who are looking for their own Black genealogical stories is that they need to kind of dig deep and think about little bits and pieces that have come to them from their elders, things that they remember seeing when they went on those trips down south, things that didn't make any sense to them when they saw them, but they kind of register. And so I've been getting a lot of feedback over the years from different Black readers of Southern heritage who are going, oh my God, I took my grandfather who hadn't been to Louisiana since he was 10 from LA back to Louisiana, and some of the things that you said about the cane and all this and I'm like, yeah, that's what and so write it all down. Don't leave any stone unturned. Don't leave any detail, just write it all down. And then what you do is, because all the pieces aren't there, something that really got to me when I was learning was about a lot of things. Was, I don't know if you remember this documentary, but it was a documentary documenting like the search for the past of the Holocaust, the Shoah in Europe. And there's this moment, I don't know what documentary this is, but it was this moment where the guy says, you're walking on the gravestones. What? So he takes like a knife, like a pocket knife. He digs around and he's showing the cobblestones are these 18th and 19th century Jewish headstones.
I remember that, and I don't know what it's from.
Right.
What is it from? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but that
you know
kind of
what
thing.
you're saying is that's so interesting that it's not on my notes, but I'm thinking right now is the generation directly, the victims and survivors of the Holocaust spent 10 or 20 years not talking about the Holocaust at all.
Right.
And if you look at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Israel, it was built in stages, and it's almost like the stages of grief. And it's such an interesting thing that you're talking about, that I'm thinking around African American generational trauma and telling story, like the passing on of the experience of slavery was so painful that it's like lost. And so there's so much digging that has to be done. That's like, and the way your entry point was through food in many ways.
Because you said something that what made it unique, what made it different. What made it unique is that you don't get to make these leaps without the stories. You don't get to make these leaps without somebody having the ultimate vulnerability to say, deep breath, this is what I went through. This is what's going on. And because of those stories, and in my family, we had a whole mental map of whose daddy was who. It was like Maury Povich. The Maury show, man. It was like, okay. And what got me was, Sarah, was that when I was digging on Ancestry, you contact people, and this pisses me off. They would say things like, I don't know how we're related. The hell you don't know how we're related. Mike, listen, can show you my great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, third grades, and show you his daughter and the son he had in Texas that she didn't even know about. Trust me, we your people. In fact, we're the only part of your people that wasn't inbred. My great-great-great-grandfather married his double first cousin when she was past child years. He wanted to before, but his daddy said, I'll disown you right on the spot. So he waited till he was dead and her husband was killed. By then, he had several Black children. Had he not gone outside, I got a picture of his aunt, looked just like him, probably looked just like his mother, because they were also very closely related. Plantation mistress in Florida. She had mittens on her hands. And for years, I looked at the picture, why did she have mittens? Then I realized she's deformed. And so, to have those people tell me, after I know their stuff, their tea, tell me that we have to check your chart. We'll have to check your heart. Because you know that we're family, despite this difficulty. And you just don't want to admit that your people could have, well, they did. They did. Your privilege and your power and your platform did not come from your meritocracy and hard work and God-given creativity. So spare me. Did I read them?
that that part in the book where you have like ancestry.com, 23andMe, all of the kind of tests, like the science of it it is like cold hard facts wrapped around so much emotion and so much history and so much. Okay, there's no question in there. You already answered the question that I was going to ask this question about do you think your writing advances the cause of social justice, which I think you already answered in talking about sort of African Americans that read your book and like brought their own family on the journey home to encourage that story. Right. Like it feels like, oh, the goal of this book in some way was to encourage people to find their stories. Right. Painful and hard, but like meaningful. And am I putting words in your mouth?
No, because I mean, these are the golden moments. I have to say that in some other ways, some people did not like the fact that I'm on the cover in my interpreter's clothes. I don't want to read no book by no slaves. Why I gotta be slaves? Why can't it all be Wakanda? Because there's no Wakanda.
Wait. Okay, hold on. Okay, when you say interpreter's clothes, you mean
being a historic interpreter of American slavery as a third-person interpreter, as a 21st century scholar who represents himself as such.
Okay, so but a 21st century scholar who is engaged in like Williamsburg, like colonial Williamsburg. What is it called?
So there's reenacting, which is different from interpreting. Interpreting is museum work. Reenacting, they do some level of that as actor interpreters, but the real reenactors are the Civil War and Revolutionary War and French and Indian War. They're usually war people. Note that. We are two different tribes in the same kind of family, the same mishpacha, but we're different from each other. Interpreters, domestic history, folk history, history of trades, civilian life. Reenactors, war. Interpreters, liberal progressive. Reenactors, very homeschooled and not the kind you like. and all of that kind of stuff. It's two different things. But I mean, some people don't even understand that. And so they assume that I am there to sort of present some fantasy of plantation life, a la Tara, Gone with the Wind, etc. And I'm like, that ish would end so fast. I mean, listen, no, I am not Herschel Walker. I don't play that slave stuff. Whoops. I said it. Hi virtual world. But for real, I don't dig it. And I mean, no, this was created by Black interpreters who finally had a voice, who said, we're going to finally bring the civil rights movement to Southern living history museums. And we're going to have people that talk, people who express, people who teach the history. We're going to create the other half tour. So you can see that 52% of colonial Williamsburg as a functioning colonial capital was Black, let alone the other 2%, which were Native, Jewish, other non-European immigrants, and people who just found themselves in the colonial capital, and people of dubious mixed origin, which really means Black. But the bottom line is 54% of the world of that regal city was not white folks. And the population that was white was predominantly poor. So when people walk around, prancing around thinking, yeah, we could all been like this. No, you wouldn't have. Jefferson would have spat on you before he talked to you as non-gentry. He was more likely to talk to the enslaved people who made his whole life easy than he was to a poor white person on the street. Democracy now. So, that food thing that goes along with that even. So, I mean, can I go back a little bit?
Yeah, but I do want to talk about the new book.
Okay, let me give this little thing first.
Okay, go.
Because I'll do it quick. a regular hat on one leg.
Okay, got it.
So, a couple of months ago, I saw a book, and I had to buy this book because it was so nonsensical. And it was the kind of book that's the antithesis of my work. It was a book, a children's book written in 2003, talking about Jefferson and his kitchen. And it shows him in the fields and the gardens doing his own garden work. It shows him making his own ice cream and cheese and all that other good stuff and French fries and look at me. Never mentions James Hemings once, the real first American gourmet. And so, I mean, when I was growing up, I remember there was this other book, the trivia book, and I remember the book had a very similar image, but it was much older. And the image was of Thomas Jefferson with that silver-belled tray with his red ponytail tied back. They love to put him in this ponytail. I don't know why. He didn't really have one. They think that's cute. And an apron. And he's feeding. And my grandmother looked at that picture and said a very impolite word. And said, nah, be fill in the blanks tea. It didn't happen like that. So that fascinated me. But how did it happen? So you have to look inside yourself and go, okay, if we did that cooking, what did that mean? And so the answers are, what was Thomas Jefferson's one of his favorite meats? Guinea fowl. What's his favorite vegetable? Black-eyed peas. What was George Washington's favorite breakfast? Hoe cakes and honey. They lived our lives. They lived for us. They could not live without us. Robert E. Lee, fried chicken's favorite food. Come on now. All that watermelon okra that Thomas Jefferson grew. And Lee, I've cooked at all three there. I've cooked at Arlington House. I've cooked at Mount Vernon. I've cooked at Monticello. I'm like, I'm saying that to say this. This isn't just our provincial history as Black people. This is the history of America. And every single American ethnic group has made their mark, but especially those of us from Africa, Asia, the Middle East, South Asia, and Native indigenous people, and people from Latin America. And until people realize that our contribution, our essential role in creating this country cannot be extracted, they will never understand the meaning of America. We are happily contaminated with each other. And if you are not happily contaminated with each other, you have forfeited your Americanness.
Okay, you tell me what
ma'am.
you would rather do. Would you rather? Okay, this is a choose your own adventure.
I love those books.
Would you rather talk about your trip to Africa, West Africa, or move on to your new book, The Kosher Soul?
Okay, I can do that. Each one in like 1 minute each.
Okay.
Africa. Okay, so since 2000.
Did you go? First of all, here's the question.
Yes.
Did you go to West Africa? The places you wrote about in your book were Senegal, Ghana, and Sierra Leone.
Yes.
Did you visit those places?
All
Did you
three and
see
more.
Okay, good.
All three and more. And when I went to, before the pandemic, I went to 8 different African countries, West African countries.
After you wrote and published the book, so
Right.
2018 or 19.
So I was
fine.
already 2017 already doing the whole go to the continent thing, but it was too late for the hardback book. I did do some of that in the softback version. And long story short is that it opened my eyes to confirming what I thought would be there. But even more so, the best and biggest takeaway was not so much that we are different. What made us different was colonialism. What made us different was this disjoint between giving the West our everything, getting almost nothing back. But what made us similar was all the things that in America you're taught to be ashamed of as a Black person or hide, or as a Caribbean person or Afro-Latin person. In Africa was the center of life. And there was no shame about it because you were it. And so you felt like, oh, that's okay, I could be my full self.
Can you give an example?
Okay, so this is the one I go to the most. So
And then your new book.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. And so the biggest thing was for me was how little boys and little girls play at dance and music. and using the body and moving the body and making sound into music is considered the next, how the next generation picks up the culture. And how in America, when Black kids do this, you're fidgeting, you can't pay attention. What's wrong with you? Why do you have to talk that way? Da, 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 da. Even though our music, our speech, our dance then becomes a multi-billion-dollar industry in the hands of other people.
They call it impulse control.
And so we would be in, as Black boys in DC area at school, and we'd be, doing little go-go beats at our desks. Well, we weren't not paying attention. We were focusing ourselves. We were coming to a meditative point. In Africa, they don't care. They love that when the boys did, because number one, they're not in trouble. They're doing their thing, and they're also replicating the culture. But when you're over here, and then when it's kind of like if I didn't have Jewish culture to bounce us off of, I wouldn't have these examples. But it was like so many of the customs that we have in Jewish culture, not in peoplehood, not just the religion, that people would look at and go, "You odd, crazy people." That was the pre-Holocaust way of doing it. Even in America, you must be intellectually deficient because these weird things that you people keep doing. What's wrong with you? Well, that still happens for Black and brown children, And the flip side is that for East Asian families and South Asian families, generations of, you eat that. That doesn't smell right. I don't like the way that looks. And then you turn around and then they nephew and their grandson, right, telling you what you can put your sriracha on. Child, bye. Kosher Soul?
Okay. Wait, so I wanted to read something from your book as a bridge to Kosher Soul.
Sure.
Cooking from a place of heritage, identity, and belonging is a powerful thing fraught with class and cultural politics. The first debate is about authority. The second debate is about authenticity and who is representing what and why. The third is usually about ownership. The fourth, but not the last, is usually audience. So you chose to write a book called Kosher Soul. And I want to know why, first of all, but also what does Kosher Soul have to tell us about, similar to what this book tells us about America, about American peoplehood, about cultural creation? What does Kosher Soul have to tell us about America and African Americans and Jews?
Okay, so it was a debate in my head which baby was going to be born first. Which book? The cooking gene kind of went out because I was still kind of had a foot in the world of Jewish education, et cetera, and it was a little bit too close. So Kosher Soul for me, I want to talk about my journey a little bit, as each of my books do, with food, and that's okay. But I also want to give a light onto Jews of color, but also the African American impact on American Jewish life as a whole, the impact of American Jews on African American life, and show just a complete sort of Venn diagram, and show how food is woven into all of that. So I will say one cute little thing about Kosher Soul, because we're getting that green light, red light thing.
Okay.
But
go ahead. Thank you.
On the cover of Kosher Soul, there are 4 halot. There are 4 halas. I wanted the minute you pick up that book to be, you ain't in Kansas anymore moment. So I made sure one of the halas is black, red, and green. One of the halas is blue and white. One of the halas is rainbow, is Roy G. Biv, Pride colors. And another one of the halas is black, red, green, rainbow sprinkles, blue and white. All the above. That all these pieces are intertwined together. And that is what being an American Jew is, and being an African American is. These stories and histories and foods and cultures are intertwined and have been for quite some time. And so in talking with various people, I know at least one person told me about what they do. I don't ask for a lot of recipes, although there are more recipes in that book than are in the cooking gene. But one informant from interviewee from Baltimore talks about how she made kosher crab cakes with like a little bit of salmon, but a lot of like kosher surimi, fake crab. There's a difference between that and the stuff in the store, and like a ton of Old Bay. And she says that because of this, her making this for Shabbat, her husband says he hopes that his sons find another Black Jewish sister who can cook as good as his wife, because this is the best. She said they're even better than the real thing. I don't know about that, but at least that that kind of story of these foods, how they fit in people's lives. I will say one quick thing. I did talk to white Southern Protestant converts to Judaism and asked them how do they make their own version of Southern food. And I talked to a couple of Muslim chefs in Philadelphia, and what really got me was that Black Jews, Southern white converts to Judaism, Black Muslims who are in the culinary scene kind of had the same shopping lists and dietary concerns and ways they approach the tradition, give or take some examples. And what that really taught me was we do have common things in common to talk about. We do have a common ground despite some serious political differences, both domestic and international, that may preclude the idea of us talking and eating together. But there is a common ground and we can take advantage of that.
I love that. It sounds like you like the messiness of intersectional identity.
Absolutely.
And that's like where you like want everyone to live in the messiness of intersectional identity.
Both of these books are about mosaics, right?
Yeah.
They're about the fact, I don't know how
and they're written that way too. I want to say they are not linear books. Like you don't come away really understanding
there you go.
Michael's life trajectory. You come away understanding an emotional experience and an immersive, transformative story, but it's very detailed, but so lyrical. Anyway, okay.
I have to ask that. That's like the author's dream is to someone else to get it.
These are
yes.
questions from the audience and I think also online.
Sure. Quick fire.
Okay, can you give us a brief preview of your kosher Southern cooking? Especially, what are you using to substitute for pork and shrimp in your recipes?
Pork is easy. We have wonderful kosher lamb bacon, beef bacon, smoked turkey. That's not hard. The smoked meat thing is not hard at all. That's not the difficult part. Now
seafood is hard. You said crab, yeah.
Yes.
Hard.
However, there, as much as there are these interesting substitutions, I guess when things are kind of mashy or chopped up or in soup, now the whole thing, nah. But like those kind of things like gumbos, egg rolls, spring rolls, you can make it work. You can make it work.
What recommendations would you provide to people looking to investigate their personal and cultural histories while honoring the cuisine that ties generations together? Where should one start?
First of all, don't be intimidated by the fact that you may not have all the details passed down. Do your homework. African Americans and Black Americans of Caribbean or African heritage, when it comes to DNA stuff, please cut this knot. You cannot, I'm sorry. Genetic genealogy is important. If you are a continental African, please do your DNA. Not because you need it, because you are giving life to, I don't know how, every time I've met, in fact, I'll tell you one quick important story. A lady who I learned from and worked with the Smithsonian, Diane Jai, her husband of late, Gorgie, he did his DNA. And I knew them growing up. I didn't know he'd done his DNA. And then he passed away in the years we had lost contact. And I asked Diana, she said, oh yeah, Gorgie did his DNA. And then one of my distant cousins did his DNA, and his ancestor was enslaved at George Washington. Well, Gorgie and Diana did not live very far from Mount Vernon. And it happened that his ancestor was a relative of Gorgie's from Senegal. That my cousin was able to find out where he was from, because this man, before he left this planet, made the decision to get his DNA tested. So that, and it happened to be my cousin. And he said, do you know Gorgie? I said, there's only one person I know named Gorgie, and he's from Virginia. He said, yes, his wife is, I said, uh-huh. So I talked to Diana after many years, and I said, my cousin is So they got in touch with each other. And she was able to tell him all about the connection to Senegal, etc. And it was really beautiful.
I feel like that it should be like part of reparations in some way.
Yes.
Like everyone has to do the DNA
Yes.
test and
Or,
like
you know, give
find
us
their,
the
there
ability
has
to
be
get the
some-
test, go to African ancestry as well, go to the continent. Yes, it's part of it. It's because it is not just like, oh yay, you know, those the big commercials. I used to wear a dirndl, now I wear a lederhosen. What the hell? Who cares? For us, this is like mental health stuff.
Yeah.
And also the food part is you go there and you go, okay, so the roots of our food, where we have celebration food is, I'm not ashamed of it, but it's celebration food, not everyday food. Our everyday food, Caribbean, Africa, South, Brazil, all of it, is fairly healthy and good for you, strong. But you have to see the whole picture to do that. So I would just say that people should really delve in. Once you know, okay, I'm part Yoruba, I'm part Nigerian. Nigerian, sorry y'all, Nigerian means 300 different ethnic groups. You need a little bit better than that. Now, you can read the book and other things to find out that, you know, if you're from Virginia roots, the chances are that your Igbo or their neighbors is very high. That's 60% of people came to Virginia. And then those people would then be, the domestic slave trade, pushed across the South. And the Igbo are extremely prolific in terms of, you know, children, twins, etc. So if you're a Black family and you have twins in your family, that Yoruba and Igbo blood is high. So I'm just trying to say that once you know that, do the deep dive, find out everything you can, go to the markets, see the food, try out the recipes on your own pace.
If you can't go to Africa yet, you might just hire a genealogist. You get your test.
Yes.
Hire a genealogist. Go to a library. In the book, Michael talks a lot about this, which a white librarian and a sword and there's so much actual real information out there. It's just hard and time consuming to get to.
Right.
Okay. How has your recent research about your ancestry and genealogy informed your relationship to food?
It's made me, you know, it's made me think a lot about like how the Black body is affected by the transfer of cultures, etc. Like, you know, notice some things. I'll put this one little thing out, and that is how we interact with carbohydrates here versus Africa, because we have a lot of European in us, some of us. I think the majority of us have at least 15% European ancestry. My friend BJ Dennis, a chef who was in High on the Hog, as I was, his father had 0 European ancestry, but he's from the Sea Islands. I wonder why. The mosquitoes kept him at bay. The best friend of the Black woman.
But you, Michael, have like almost 25%.
Almost
And in the
25%.
book, he goes back to Ireland and Scotland, and it's like a whole journey.
So I have an African butt and a European gut. And like, so when people talk about our health and they be pointing fingers, I'm like, you better talk to great grandpa McCarthy, because I don't see the same body frame in Africa. You know, it's different. So the connection between health, diet, where I should be centered have changed drastically, because now it's not just like, oh, I'm just American or I'm just a Black American. No, I have a lot of different genetic pullings in my system. And if you don't have that conversation and deal with that vulnerability and deal with that historical truth, then you're never going to get to the bottom of why the Rona hunts us down twice as fast as anybody else.
Oh, I didn't get to that question. I had a question about Corona and how that, well, okay, back to this. How do you feel about food deserts in Black and brown communities? How do we fix them?
We fix them by taking back the land. We come from an agrarian people who were an agrarian people for thousands of years. And then we come from people who were promised 40 acres and a damn mule, which was quickly rescinded by horrible Andrew Johnson, may he rest in hell, along with the rest of them, and to punish us for being loyal to this country while the people who held us in bondage were not. So, the problem here, the problem in these two areas, we have a lot of pollution. Soil is problematic. I've been to more than one black farm in an urban area where they couldn't even plant in the soil. They had to plant above the soil using artificial stuff brought in. In DC, my folks who do farming there run into the issue of the federal government owns most of the land, and private land is expensive and hard to buy. So you have to put all these things together. My grandfather, blessed memory, Michael Twitty, fought very hard to get black farmers back on the land and successfully sued the United States government for his mistreatment of black farmers. This nonsense that we endure, why can't you all, why can't you work? You don't work hard enough. You better get the hell out of here. My daddy picked cotton. My grandfather picked cotton, and his daddy, and his daddy, and his daddy, and his daddy. Don't you tell me about not working hard. My grandfather fed 18 children on his farm. You understand me? My father taught me how to put a seed in the ground and raise up, make something out of nothing. My mother and grandma taught me how to cook. I come from self-sufficient people. What did Elijah Muhammad say? Do for self. All of those traditions, all of them put together, mean that I don't care if we start with planter boxes on a windowsill. We must get land access back. We must demand no more golf courses in the Sea Islands. No more lack of access to water. No more, loitering laws, trespassing laws. Let us forage the way our forefathers and foremothers did. And then once we do that, and once our children know the beauty of working with other people's children of all backgrounds and farm together and work together, maybe we won't need to argue about CRT because nobody will be able to tell a lie anymore because we'll tell each other the truth and feed each other the truth.
So,
I'm hot right now.
What you're saying reminds me of like in Jewish tradition, if a family raises up their children and doesn't pass on the tradition, it takes like barely one generation until everything is like, you don't know any prayers, you don't know any of the rituals, you don't know any of. So gardening and farming and agricultural, like that stuff is important to learn and hard to, and hasn't been passed on. And I'm curious about, and this is not one of the questions. I'm going crazy here. I'm curious about your thoughts on like, when did that happen? Is it urbanization? Was it during the Great Migration?
Yes.
Was it okay? And then
yes, and it wasn't. People used to blame the kids. No, it was my mom's generation, because my mom's generation heard
which I think is like
real.
Assimilation. It's like it's almost like it's a kind of a form of assimilation.
But it was also because, Sarah, we had necessary organizations. Everybody has a moment in this. So the Urban League is telling you, don't be country like that no more. Nation of Islam is telling you, don't eat that country food. That's the slave food. The Morris Science Temple saying something similar. And then the church is like, oh, you gotta dress and act the part of urbane, civilized Negroes. So even though all these organizations were contributing to some level of uplift among us, there was also this kind of like thumbs down. And plus, I'm gonna just be frank with you. A lot of the country way, like I usually wear a little bag around my neck, forgot it today, was the African way. And they knew it. Some of the reasons why some of those things weren't said again, people were trying to run away from those old ways, that old culture. And that's unfortunate. But the young people who are now doing farming projects, et cetera, are really embracing all of that again. And it's up to us to collectively teach and share everything we know. We have digital resources, we have books, we have conversations with each other, things we remember, things that we still do and pass on to each other. And also we need to learn about our neighbors and our friends and family across national borders. The more you know about your cousins, the more illuminates your own history and cultural experience. It's like when we as Jews, well, that's what's going on in Iran. Okay, that's what's going on. It was going on in Poland, and we learn more about Yahadut because we've had that conversation. And so that's really what it comes down to. I don't want anybody to have gloom and doom about this because it, if you will it, it is not a dream, right? So that's how it goes.
Okay, last question. We just passed the holiday of Passover, and so I want to read something for your book, and then I want to ask you a question.
Yes,
Okay?
ma'am.
Because we're looking forward to Kosher Soul, and we're gonna end on a place of hope. From a place of hope. Okay, here we go. Passover is thus my favorite holiday. You say in the book. Why not? I am a descendant of enslaved people. I take this holiday personally. There is something truly profound about a cultural moment like Passover, where this is made manifest, a moment where you are obligated to debate and discuss some of the most important questions and issues of the human condition while debating and discussing the execution of your family's heirloom recipes. The Haggadah states, now we are slaves. Every day I suit up and go out to the plantation kitchens and cook like our ancestors. I live that phrase. I am not enslaved, but by showing the living what the dead went through, I live a scary and unsettling past. I feel like a doorway for all the spirits of the plantations I visit. I feel their souls passing through me as I cook and tell their stories. At the end of the day, I feel like a terminal and less like a man who is breathing and aware.
I don't even remember writing that, but I know what I know. I like, yeah, that's how I feel. Sarah's right. That's exactly how I feel.
So I just want to ask you to maybe talk a little bit about this Passover and the Passover menu and but we're gonna end on a place of hope.
This Passover was crazy. I had almost 30 people for the two seders. One was 17 people, 16 people. The other one was like 13 people. And I did the whole foil down the kitchen, boil every dish. I mean, I'm a chassid on Passover. And I mean, it was a lot of fun. We did the West African brisket with the peppers and the onions and the ginger and the garlic and all that good stuff. Matzo meal fried chicken. We did collard greens. I have an African American Seder plate, which you can look up online and see what that looks like. And the 4 questions in Gullah Geechee. I usually ask the 4 questions, not only in Hebrew, but at least one question in Yiddish, one question in Ladino, another question in Mende, the ancestral language of my mother's side, and Tree from Ghana or Igbo. I bring my ancestors to the table with me. All of that's very important. I'm also of Eastern European Jewish descent from Ukraine. Don't ask me how, but like Prego spaghetti sauce is in there. And of course, I'm a kidney person. I eat rice. So jollof rice, all that kind of good stuff. But also like Census and Megina, which is like Sephardic matzo lasagna without the cheese, or it can be with cheese, but ours is lamb and onions and stuff.
Like minna.
Like minna, yes, minna.
Yes.
Like my rabbis probably call it Megina, mina.
My Turkish minna. Yes.
Right, okay.
Right.
So they were from Monastir.
Oh.
Right. So they were the other part of the
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And so all of those fun things that come along with just having been part of a diaspora. Once you're part of a diaspora, I'm sorry, there are no borders. I mean, you can't, I'm not saying appropriate somebody's stuff, but I'm also saying there are no borders in terms of enjoying, celebrating the survival of your people, how they've manifested the tradition, and how it can be passed on. And we did the green onion thing. So I don't know if you know this, but quickly, the Persian and Iraqi tradition is to use green onions to beat each other up during Dayenu. And so we did that. And then everybody goes, what? And then we, did our whole like hot guy with all the animal sounds and go down Moses. And I mean, every trick in the book, finger puppets, mask, I go all out. And my dog gained about 5 pounds in matzah. So, Kosher Soul, last note, there are tons of menus for everything from Sigid to Mamuna to Pesach to all the holidays to Shabbat. And a lot of them are, for just so you know, are plant-based friendly. So in other words, there are meat recipes, but I've designed it in such a way that if you really want to, you can make a vegetarian or vegan alteration to these menus. I've also directed people to Joe Nathan's cookbooks, Marcy Cohen Ferris, Claudia Roden, Faye Levy, Rabbi Gil Marks of blessed memory, and other people, and a slew of Black authors, because everything in the menus are in the book. So I really wanted to really open up so people could begin to build their own multicultural intersectional libraries, and know that I didn't make this up. This is generations of people all working together because we love how food translates into heritage. And I just hope that you all pre-order, because I'm gonna just say this.
Out in August.
There you go. We're gonna pre-order, because you can do an independent bookstore. You have a Black-owned bookstore, great. You have a local bookstore, great. You want to go Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I don't care, great. But pre-orders are very important for authors of color, because they tell the publisher, we're worth investing in. We're worth investing in and publishing. And yes, money talks, and you know what walks. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
I don't have to even thank the audience for the applause. So welcome. Thank you. I want to thank both Michael and Sara for coming and joining us this evening, especially Michael talking about the mosaic of your past and the food. I want to know more about the food. I want to thank the Hearing and Speech Agency for providing accessibility this evening. And I also want to thank our audience, both in person and virtual, for joining us. If you haven't already, please pre-order your copy of Kosher Soul, coming out in August. And with that, stay safe, take care, and have a great rest of your evenings.
Thank you. Yeah, he on his day job is working with students.